What is going on, my horror fans and friends? It is your boy Woodsboro Fanatic, and we are back with day 18 of my horror movie challenge, watching and reviewing a film I have never seen before. And today's film was one of my most anticipated horror films of the year, as I'm sure it was for most of you. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. Today's film is the highly anticipated Maxxxine, starring Mia Goth, directed and written by Ty West, and this is the third installment in the Ty West trilogy. I've seen a lot of mixed reviews regarding this film, so I'll just start off by saying this. In my opinion, this is absolutely a movie that is worth your time. Is this movie bad? Not in the slightest. Is this movie the best in the trilogy? In my opinion, not in the slightest. This is absolutely a movie that you should see in theaters, though, on the big screen. I think the aesthetic that they bring to the film is part of the experience that needs to be seen on big screen. So absolutely, do yourself a favor, go check this out in theaters. Starting off with the positives, I think they absolutely excel at capturing the essence of the 80s. I mean, they did a phenomenal job, from the set pieces to the cinematography to the wardrobe designs to the banging ass soundtrack that they have. I mean, this soundtrack is nothing short of amazing. Absolute bangers from top to bottom. And again, I think this 80s aesthetic that they excel at might be the best thing that this movie has going for it. And I mean that in the best way possible. And with our main character Maxxxine making her transition into horror, I thought it was really dope that we got to see kind of the behind the scenes of Hollywood, where we take trips to the Universal backlot where they just had some amazing homages to classic horror like the Bates Motel. All that stuff was incredibly intriguing. I think this movie does a brilliant job, and really we can credit Ty West for this as well. But this movie creates its own vibe and tone while still implementing themes from the first two films, which ultimately gives the trilogy a complete story with natural progression. But it truly is amazing to be able to watch all three of these movies and get a different vibe from all of them, while still feeling the connection or the connective tissue throughout them. I think he has just mastered that, and again, props to him. The cast absolutely needs praise in this film because each and every single one of them delivered in their respective roles, including the ones who get limited amount of screen time. But the standouts here are absolutely Kevin Bacon as the private investigator, Elizabeth Debicki as the director on this film, and then Giancarlo Esposito as I believe he's Maxxine's agent. Goodness gracious, all three of them just absolutely ooze charisma and just steal the screen every time they are shown. And it truly is a shame. I think one of the flaws of this film is that we don't get enough character development from some of those side characters. But again, when they are on screen, you are just absolutely captivated. They do a phenomenal job. And we can't talk about performances without mentioning Mia Goth herself. She is the star of this. Her character is the epitome of a star, and Mia Goth is just so fitting for this role because she embodies those traits of Maxxxine to the absolute fullest. Nothing short of amazing from her, as always. I think once you look at her body of work throughout this trilogy, it's pretty much damn near impossible to not call her a star, not call her one of the greatest working actresses in the business as of right now. I also thought the writing was very well done in terms of its commentary on Hollywood and what it takes to make it in the business, the ins and outs of it, and kind of the consequences as well as the rewards for certain risks you will take to get what you want in this business. I thought the commentary on that was very, very well executed. And I do know this film was heavily inspired by giallo horror. While I'm not the most knowledgeable in that subgenre of horror, I did watch a few Dario Argento films to kind of get a taste of it, and you can absolutely see the inspiration there, from the way the killer is dressed, the black gloves, the kind of LA noir vibe he takes on with this, the murder mystery aspect. The kills themselves definitely giallo inspired. The practical effects on the kills are awesome. It is a shame that we don't get enough of them. I think that's something that this movie definitely lacks. But from the kills that we do get, they're definitely impactful. They'll definitely have you cringing at the screen or have you looking away. I just wish we got more of them. Now, before I get into my negatives for this film, I do want to say, and I thought about this after watching the film, and I think it is a good point to make. I watched X and Pearl, which are the first two installments of this trilogy. I watched both those films without any context as to what they were about. I didn't know anything about the hype. There was no anticipation built. And I think ultimately that made for a better viewing experience because, again, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. I think part of the downfall of this movie, and again, it's on myself, it's on everybody who builds these expectations. Part of that is the hype that I created for myself. This was so anticipated throughout the past year that the more we waited, the more my expectations grew. And ultimately, that led to me being somewhat underwhelmed, is what I'll say. Not disappointed at all, because again, this is still a very entertaining film. Just underwhelmed because I had set my expectations so high. My first negative with this film is something that separates it completely from the first two in this trilogy, and it's the fact that there's just not really any horror throughout this film. This is more of a entertainment focused action crime thriller. Say what you want about X and Pearl, but they are absolutely horror movies. The themes of horror, the tone of horror is at the forefront of those films, whether X is a slasher or whether Pearl is a psychological film. You watch those and you can tell that those are horror films. That is an element of this that I think lacked incredibly, especially with this shaping up to be the final installment in this, story for Ty West. Just wish there were at least a few moments where I could at least feel some suspense, especially with themes of the Nightcrawler being explored, the serial killer on the loose. Just give me something. And for a movie of this magnitude, with the exploration of themes in Hollywood and being a star, it just felt like there wasn't enough at stake ultimately. The aesthetic of this film helps with the overall intrigue, but the story itself does not do enough to justify the curiosity of us as a viewer or an audience. And again, the third act is where they just lose it completely. While I thought the idea of who the killer was made sense, ultimately it was predictable. It wasn't executed properly in the slightest. There was really no reveal to it. For this being kind of a LA noir murder mystery homage, there was no mystery to it. And then once we do get the reveal, again, the tones that were established throughout the first two acts of the films is just completely thrown out the window. And we're getting shootouts, and aside from where the final act takes place, there was just nothing good going for that. I know this has been a long review, guys, but there is a lot to talk about within this film, especially with this being possibly the final installment in what has been just a phenomenal trilogy, to say the least. Nothing short of impressive from Ty West. Ultimately, still an enjoyable film. Definitely go check this out in theaters, because this has probably the best cinematic vibe of the three. And I'm just incredibly impressed with what Ty West was able to create in such a short amount of time. This is why he is one of my favorite directors in the genre today.